Okay, class, so the only thing that this video is going to cover are the foldable documents, which we'll probably end up doing in class so that you have a physical copy, but I figured I'd make a video of this just in case anybody misses it or is absent or whatever. So this is the composition of a method, and it basically just explains what each word in the method does. Now remember, a method is just an action word, like it's just a verb, and it does something. So like, you know, if you have a bank account class, you're going to have to deposit money. That, you know, that's going to be a different calculation than a withdrawal method, okay? So again, all a method does is it just does something. So there's four parts to it. The first part is where we typically see the word public, but it could be private. So you got either the words public or private. So it describes the type of access a client or a subclass has to the method. So if it's private, this class has access to it, and other classes don't. And if it's public, the client or the subclass has access to it. Okay. Next up, we typically see void, or you know, void would be for well, let's just go for it. It's just the return type. So it's either void or it's a data type. Remember, the data types are int, double, char, string, boolean. Okay, so it tells you whether or not the method returns a value. If nothing's returned, you use the word void, and it means nothing's returned. If there's a data type like int, double, char, boolean, string, then that data type must be returned. Okay. Next up is the name of the method. So in this case, we have the name move. That's something's going to move. Okay, so the name of the method should be descriptive, and it should describe what this method does. Okay, so use descriptive English words. And last is parameter. So my guess, just looking at this method is going to move something a certain amount of times. Okay, so parameters are variables declared in the heading to receive outside information and bring into the method for the task. And we'll see that with the class, the composition for a class, but basically main's passing this times variable into move, and then move would do some sort of calculation with it. Okay. So that's the first foldable for methods, and I'm going to close that down. Yeah, whatever. Now we've got the foldable for the class. So these are just the different sections of a class, and so some of you that haven't had this programming in over 6 months will definitely want to pay attention here. Okay, so all classes start off with this heading, public class, in this case rectangle. The heading defines the class as a new data type. The class name must match the file name and constructor name. So that should be fine. So we create a main rectangle, and then the class would be the rectangle right here. Which, by the way, you guys might want to program this, because this is a pretty good, you know, program to run and see how it works. Next up, you got the private instance variables that store the state of the object. I never put the word private. I always just say int and then my length. We're going to get into more public and private later in the semester, but you know, you could use private or you can use just leave it blank. It's fine. But this is where the variables go, and they must be declared in order for the compiler to allow you to use the variables. Next up, we got the constructor. The constructor, if you'll notice, it has the exact same name as the class up here. Okay, so the purpose of the constructor is to build the object and initialize private instance variables. Okay, so the constructor, if you go down to main, if you recall, in main we create the constructor, it gets called right here when we create our object. And since an object can only be created once, the constructor can only be called one time, and that's where you would pass in the length and width to initialize the length and width variables. Okay. Next up, and you don't have to go in this specific order, but you know, I just did this so we could you know, label these, but it is kind of nice doing your accessors and then your mutators. So accessor methods, I would have, yeah, I would probably even, usually when I program I do the mutators first, but it's up to you however you want to do it. There's no specific order, but we'll just go through this one first. The accessor methods, I always say use the word get because we're getting something, and then that will make you think of the word return. Something needs to be returned, and therefore you don't use the word void, you use the data type. So accessors give the client some information about the object. Accessor methods do not change the state of the object, meaning nothing gets assigned in here. The state of the variables stay the same. All this is doing is getting the parameter, and it's, you know, returning my perimeter. Same with this one, get area, it's returning my area. So accessors just get information, okay? Mutators, on the other hand, when you see the word mutate, you think, you know, like X-Men, to change. So mutators can change the state of private instance variables of the object. So that's where I like to use the word set, because you're thinking, oh, something's being set, so a variable's being set. You use the equal symbol to set a variable. So this one passes in the length and width, and it sets the length and width. This one sets the perimeter, so it's setting a calculation, and setting area is running a calculation as well. Okay, and those all get called. See how set perimeter gets called, set area gets called, and then we can get the perimeter and get the area. Okay. At the same time, the last one, we have the toString method, and the purpose of the toString is to build and return a string representation of the object. So you can see where it's not void, it's returning a string. So when it says a string representation of the object, this is the string representation that it's returning. It's just saying the rectangle with length of, and then whatever your my length is, and width of, and then my width. So that actually gets called right here with my, if you're trying to print an object, you know, typically you would say your object dot, you know, and then get area or set area or whatever you're trying to do. Well, the compiler's smart enough to know, instead of saying my rectangle dot toString, it just knows that if you're trying to print an object, it automatically calls the toString method for you. And so this kind of comes in handy if you were trying to display information about your object. So if I were you, I would create this main rectangle for some of you that need a little bit of review. And you can see the output that goes into this. If you don't want to completely program in it, I would say at least go through and read through each line and see if you understand the flow of this thing, and see how the methods get called up here, and how the output, you know, would display. But we'll create these in class quickly, and then, you know, we'll cut them up, and then you can fold them over to see what. Because ideally what will happen is this would be the back side of this page right here, and like you would cut right here, and then you could fold them over and kind of quiz yourself on what each section of the program is called and what it does. So anyway, this is the foldables video, and that's it.